I will call us to order, please, the Board of County Commissioners regular meeting for Tuesday, February 27th. Good morning, Administrator Moker-Heisky.
Morning.
Are there any adjustments to the agenda this morning?
There aren't any from staff.
Any from the board? Seeing none, any emergency business this morning?
No.
Then we will move right into public comment. And we have just two folks signed up here in Harris Hall, so we'll start with them. Then I'll turn it over to Tanya for the online queue if there's anyone wishing to provide comment remotely today, and then I'll check back and see if anyone's a late arrival in the hall wishing to speak. So this morning we'll start with Alan McWayne, although I don't see Alan in the hall. So we will move on to John Crowder. And Mr. Crowder, if you would come to the podium. You will see a clock on the wall set for 3 minutes, which is your maximum time, and the timer will start when you state your name for the record. Welcome.
John Crowder. I'm a resident in Ward 5, Eugene, off of River Loop 1. So I was at the, I'm going to start off by talking about the fairgrounds. So I've been a resident in Eugene. It'll be 80 years this March. And I grew up on College Hill, and the fairgrounds was an active part of my life. And so the logging conference I was able to go to this weekend for the first time. You'd probably say, why have you been in Eugene this long and not going to the logging conference? And I had a friend invite me to go to see the equipment. And I talked to a vendor there. And the vendor was from Michigan. He brought 2 semi-trucks full of equipment. He had space. He didn't get as much space as he wanted. And so then I reflect that conversation. And growing up, I remember Eugene being the timber capital of the world. Well, I'm not sure if it's the timber capital of the world anymore, but it is a heartbeat of the economy around here, all the way from woodcutters to Christmas trees and the logging industry. And it's huge. And so then we fast forward to 2024, and we talk about putting a stadium in the fairgrounds. So, and I've been told if the stadium goes in the fairgrounds, then all of a sudden there's not room for the logging conference with all of its equipment. So last night I was at the Eugene City Council meeting. The logging conference is a diamond in the rough here. I mean, it attracts people. So what happens if the stadium comes in to the fairgrounds? Well, maybe then the logging conference moves to Portland. So the other thing I talked about last night was free enterprise. Jobs is an important part of Lane County. We need to protect jobs. And the jobs in Lane County, we have all these homeless people. There's not enough jobs for the people, and there's all sorts of reasons why we have the homeless. So I think one of the biggest things we need to do here is we need to protect small business, the economy, and the logging conference is part of that. So evidently you folks and the city of Eugene and I guess the state are going to determine about the ballpark. So I guess my vote is that you got to figure something out. You need to save jobs, and I know it's a complicated issue. The other thing that came to attention is that so I guess an action plan, I would think, the city wants to send this to the voters. I think this ought to go to the voters of Lane County because the fairgrounds is a county entity on public land, and somehow the whole county needs to decide and not just the city of Eugene. So my recommendation is that you push for that. The other item that I want to talk about
Excuse me, sir, we do have a time limit, and you are at time, and just to make sure we get to other folks.
Oh, I'm off. Okay.
Thank you very much for
all right,
public
thank
comment.
you.
You are welcome to email comments to us or come back next week. If
I'll be back next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I see Mr. McWayne has rejoined us. Would you still like to make public comment this morning? Please step to the podium. Your 3 minutes will begin when you state your name for the record. Thank you.
Started without me. Alan McWayne, longtime city resident. I'm here to speak about the stadium, and we all know that there's still a $43 million funding gap. Maybe $7.5 million will come from the state, but they've already turned that down last June. The owner of the EMS, ESG, has said they'll commit another $10 million. However, the city's own resolution they just passed, drafted by legal staff, says, quote, "The owner ESG has expressed plans to achieve approximately $10 million in additional private funds." I'm skeptical about that. Express plans to achieve approximately. Now, if ESG is the largest ownership group in minor league, they have to have $10 million sitting around, and I wonder why they've waited till this last moment to announce that. M say that their total contribution now is $23 million, but we know $3 million of that is just fixtures, furniture, batting cages, bases. $10 million is prepaid rent. Elmore himself told me that is expected over 30 years, not 10 years or 20 years. And again, I think this $10 million might just be sponsorships. I hope I'm not wrong. This county is still not committed to the stadium, which was rejected by its own consultants. Now, Commissioner Lovell just told me that that master plan might be revisited in 2 weeks, and I sure hope so. If not, Mr. Lovell, that's my ask. You said I needed an ask, okay? The master plan and further design work have been on hold since April for the plan, and further design work since August. In January, this board commented that the city council should not move ahead with the bond while the stadium was so uncertain. Again, Mr. Lovell's terms, putting the cart before the horse. The county administrator, Mr. Mokohysky, has yet to determine how much of the 2% increased visitor taxes can be used for a stadium, which does not attract visitors. Now, I appreciate Pat Farr telling me in our meeting at the fairgrounds last night that 8,340 rooms were booked for the logging conference, which might have to move to Albany. And it's so ironic that we might build a stadium, not for visitors, but it would drive away visitors to long-time profitable events like the logging conference. So finally, the council has been waiting for three elements. One, Mr. Mokohysky mentioned that they will be absolved of further financial losses generated by the stadium. So they're waiting for county commitment and are waiting for secure funding. So I don't see the secure funding so far. I just mentioned to Ms. Triger that August 29th, it seemed to me there was a hard stop. February 29th was the decision point, 6 months, where they had to go forward or put this on permanent hold. So you can correct me if I'm wrong later. I think we had modification to that, since we are waiting for the state legislature, their short term, and also waiting for the city bond measure. And I'll send the rest of my comments in email. Thanks for your attention, and thank you, Pat.
Thank you. Thank you for your public comment. I'll turn it over to Tanya. Do we have anyone signed up online wishing to speak this morning?
We have no one signed up online to give public comment.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone else who's entered Harris Hall late that wishes to speak in public comment this morning? Seeing none, I will close public. Oh, I'm sorry. Welcome, good morning. If you would please come to the podium. Keep an eye on the clock. Tanya, if you would reset us for the 3 minutes, thank you. And when you state your name for the record, your time will begin. Thank you.
My name is Lisa Bray. I'm just wondering where the stadium would benefit the county, especially through the tourism tax. That Lane County is a big county, it goes from here to Florence, as everybody knows. As the previous gentleman said, the logging convention did 8,000 rooms. I'm not sure that the baseball stadium would be able to rent that many rooms even over much longer of a period than 3 days. So I'm just wondering, where does it benefit the county other than the M's when there's so much work that needs to be done in this county itself? And that's all. Sorry, I didn't have anything planned. I'm concerned about the stadium. I'm a neighbor right there. And that's not addressed. We drone some pictures by permit, and the plans that you show don't even show any neighborhood around it. It's a big neighborhood right there, plump in the middle. and it will affect all of us. And I love baseball. Everybody loves baseball, but I think we need to look beyond that as to the livability in the neighborhood when that moves in. For the environment, for the night sky, for the noise, for the extra parking. The streets are already pitted, as you know, Eugene, and potholes, and I don't think the streets could handle that much traffic around there. Of course it could handle it, but it's pretty tore up as it is. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. Seeing no one else wishing to speak, I will close public comment for real now and move us on to our next item, which is Commissioner's response to public comment or any other issues or remonstrance. And I will look to my colleague for who would like to start us off this morning.
I'll start us off.
Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming and having public comment again, people. This is the greatest part of the meeting, I think, is that we can express our concerns in public and to the board that makes the policies and the decisions. A lot of decisions coming up. This issue about the stadium is obviously going to go either somebody's good way or somebody's bad way. I mean, there's going to be a lot of emotion involved with this, so I would allow us to have the emotions, but also have our facts together and really produce an argument that is sound that the county commissioners can make their decisions upon. We are getting a lot of emails, and I would encourage you to continue with emails and communicating with your particular county commissioners so that we could know where the public is on this. Sometimes we get just bits and pieces and try to, we don't have a full picture of what really is going on. So encourage you again, thanks for coming, and go Springfield, greatest town in Lane County. I keep saying that. We'll say it again today.
Go Miller.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Trigger. And thanks for the public comment this morning. Ms. Morkowski, last Wednesday, I went to the city council meeting over at City Hall, but they hadn't told me that they weren't going to be there. It was virtual. So I sat in the room outside, and Councilor Semple was sitting in there by herself. The rest of the meeting was virtual, and I couldn't get online to be there. But there were a number of people who, like me, did not know that the city council meeting wasn't meeting they weren't meeting in person. So they were there. Upstairs of the old LCC, the new LCC building. So I had a chance to sit and talk to them. And I heard directly, they were predominantly people who were immediate neighbors to the west of the fairgrounds. And one of them was Lisa Bragg. And there was at the city council meeting last week. So instead of going to the city council meeting, they had a chance to talk to me and really get their points across. And I listened very hard. And Lisa asked me if I would meet her in her driveway at some point just to take a look at where she lives. And I said I would do that. And that was last night, yesterday evening. And Ms. Bray invited a number of neighbors. So I will say that there were, I don't know, maybe close to a dozen people who were there who live in that immediate neighborhood. And so that was what Ms. Bray was talking about, was what Mr. McWayne was talking about. He was there last night. So, you know, I had a chance to stand there at the west side of the fairgrounds, where 14th Avenue, pitted, rutted, no drainage, no sidewalks, dead ends into the fairgrounds. And I'd never actually been there before. It's off of Tyler Street. And I will say that Mr. Crowder, you made comments. He's not here anymore. He went to his first logging conference last week. There you are. I went to my first logging conference. I've lived in Eugene for 53 years, and I went to my first logging conference last week. And to support things that have been said, and I had a chance once again to see what it looks like from the very perspective of living on the end of 14th Avenue, adjacent to the fairgrounds, where the fair operates, where the logging conference operates, where the home show this week is going to be. You know, lots of things happen there. The logging conference, Mr. McWayne said that I'd told him there were 8,400, I think is what the number he said. The number that I got is there are 8,585 room nights last week generated by the logging conference. 8,585, and you multiply that by whatever that does. So the fairgrounds currently our fairgrounds is currently an economic generator for Lane County. It is an economic generator. And so as we move forward between now and what really is a drop-dead date, at least for the Eugene City Council, March 13th, we have work to do as a Board of County Commissioners, I believe. And I'm telegraphing that. And Mr. Morkowski, I told you I would ask this question. What is it that we're going to do between now and March 13th, which is the deadline for the Eugene City Council, if they choose to not place the they had a 7-1 vote to put the $15 million bond on the ballot. They can still withdraw it, or they can still modify it, whatever it may be, as late as the 13th. What are we going to do between now and then? I've given you a little bit of time to think about that, but to me, it's important that we as a Board of County Commissioners are able to respond to not 1 or 2 or 10 or 20, but dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of people who are sending us letters. I personally responded to more than 4 dozen people over the weekend who sent messages. So that's my question, Steve. And you can answer now, or you can bring it up later, whatever is the will of the chair.
You want me to respond?
Sure.
Yeah,
If
I'm happy
you-
to
if you're
say
ready
that
to,
we are, Chair and Commissioner Farr, thank you for the question. We are looking at the possibility of having a discussion with the board if we have some time. We're trying to carve out some time on March 12th. The board has a board meeting on March 12th, which is right before the City Council's March 13th meeting. Just sort of as an overall response to that, we've received a couple of requests from the City of Eugene over the course of the last couple of months on this issue, and we've responded each time with a detailed response on the status of the project and responding to specific questions and everything. So we have responded to those. We did have a discussion with the board, and I'm failing to remember the date of the board meeting, but I brought this up under county administrator announcements a few weeks ago, and the board provided some response. I wanted to verify that my intended response was reasonably accurate in terms of the board's feelings about where we're at on the project. So we will, that is the plan, we have responded to all the requests to date, and the latest inquiry that I had from the city manager was last week after the council's work session, asking if there was any update from the last update that we had provided. And so that's our intent, is to come and have a discussion with the board on March 12th and seek any additional feedback that you all may have on that so that we can provide that to the city.
Steve, thank you. That's essentially what you told me last night. And one more thing, quick thing, Chair Trigger. We're in the bottom of the ninth, so to speak, right? And but Yogi Berra said this. Remember what he said? It ain't over till it's over. Baseball is one game that doesn't end until the last out. But Chair Trigger, I'll talk about Rosa Antigone Farr soon. She's 10 days old today, but at the end of the meeting, I'll talk about her.
And one other comment I'll just make. I think, we've talked about this project now for a few years, and so sometimes this gets lost, and there's so much focus right now on what is the city council going to do to help support the project? What is the state legislature going to do to help support the project? Where is Lane County at in its prior support and potential future support of the project? So there's a lot of local and statewide entities that are all trying to do what we can do to support this effort. The reality is that we're in this position because Major League Baseball has determined that, new facilities need to be built across the country. They put these requirements in, and so now these local teams and local communities are in the position of responding to that. So we all, as a community, Lane County, the city, the state, are all doing our best to try to respond to that need, but the issue, the reason that we're in this position is because Major League Baseball has put the team and our community in the position.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Steve.
Commissioner Seneca.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that was a great explanation. Thanks, Mr. Mokrajewski. It's interesting. I spent a lot of time at the logging conference this weekend, and unlike my fellow commissioner here, I've been going for decades. But it's great to hear from the neighbors also, because this is a huge lift for you guys. I understand that. Thanks for coming out here and explaining to us your side of it and what you're going to see. And then, Mr. Crowder, you actually live in my district. You live as far away from Eugene and still being affiliated with Eugene as you can, and you understand that the stadium will have consequences. As I was meandering through the logging conference after all these years of going, still amazed by the size of it and the kind of equipment that's there, and the showing. I mean, it's packed day after day after day. at a certain point, it was kind of one of those events where you want to pull your hat down and try not to get noticed, because it was a hot button topic. Where are we going to park these? Where are we going to park this equipment? We keep hearing that, yes, the equipment will fit, but as you're sitting here looking at it, how? And I didn't have an answer for that. Because look at it, there was people that wanted more equipment. There was equipment outside that was still on trailers because it couldn't be brought in because it wouldn't fit. So it's a major event, and it's something that we really are going to have to consider and think about when these kind of decisions are made. I'll just take a second to represent Florence as we talk about this TLT being spent. They're really concerned about it because the M's aren't going to fill seats on the coast, fill beds on the coast, excuse me, and they might not be inundating everybody's emails, but they are inundating my phone, and I need to do some justice and let them know that this decision weighs heavily on them too. So, thank you.
Nothing from Commissioner Buck this morning. Thank you. Thank you to my colleagues. Thank you to our administrator for answering on the fly. And I will just, on this topic, because there's a lot to cover and a lot of detail, and for me, a lot of it is a order of operations matter. So we could be getting granular and talking about parking issues or what have you, but until a larger picture question is settled, those aren't the conversations. So what I'm looking forward to, that the discussion we get to have in a couple weeks, is more sort of the big picture, as we discussed more than 2 years ago, sort of overall project viability and how it is a value add to the community at large, but to Lane County as an entity, what the plans and possibilities are for operations and so on. I think there's a lot of bigger picture questions that we need to answer. Everyone's been very focused. The M's have done a great job of focusing everyone on the importance of retaining the team in town and of trying to hit a sort of target number for a capital construction project that we actually haven't had current costing on, now that we know some of the other impacts to the property and other buildings affected. So I'm looking forward to that bigger picture conversation. The Lane Event Center is in my district, so I am talking to folks all the time about that site, and was before this project came up, in fact, because it's a major impact to the good, and sometimes creates challenges for neighbors in terms of the 750,000 visitors that we have on that site each year, and the variety of events that are hosted there. So I'm looking forward to that bigger picture conversation. And just for clarity to Mr. McWayne, who is still here, the pause was that we were not expending effort as Lane County. We were wanting to put a 6-month window in place for the M's to try to work to close the funding gap for their project that MLB has sort of forced their hand on. And we wanted that project, or that runway, to be long enough for the legislative session to conclude should state dollars be something they wanted to go after. And so that's another reason for the 12th, as opposed to any sooner, because the legislative session will not conclude until the 10th of March. Right. Thank you. All right. Moving along, next on our agenda is our consent calendar. Do I have a motion for approval?
Yes, Chair, I move to approve and adopt the consent calendar.
It has been moved by Vice Chair Lovall, seconded by Commissioner Buck, to adopt consent calendar for Tuesday, February 27th. Details of what is on the consent calendar can be found on the online version of our agenda. All those in favor of adopting today's consent calendar signify with an aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 5-0. Thank you. And we will now move on to Health and Human Services, and I see Director Eve Gray is with us this morning to bring us the item in the matter of approving 3 contracts and 2 amendments, delegating authority to the county administrator or their designee to sign the approved actions. And this is Order 24-02-27-09. Good morning.
Good morning. This has several new contracts on it, which is the reason that I come and speak to you about contracts. So a couple of note, the Community Development Block Grant funding for wildfire survivors. Lots of thanks to Director Adams and his team for the work that they've done to make us qualify for these funds again. And there is also a new revenue contract from Pacific Source Health Plans for their initial investment for startup funding for mobile crisis. We should know more by early April about what their ongoing commitment will be in the mobile crisis space, but they wanted to help us out in the meantime as we are trying to get the program stood up. The other contracts are all renewals, but happy to answer questions if you have any.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Seeing none, I will look for a motion.
Yes, Chair, I move to approve 3 contracts and 2 amendments and delegate authority to the county administrator or their designee to sign and approve actions per order 24-02-27-09.
I'll second that.
It has been moved by Vice Chair and seconded by Commissioner Farr to approve Order 24-02-27-09. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing none, I will call for the vote. All those in favor signify with an aye.
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 Motion carries 5-0. Thank you very much. Moving right along, so we have is Greg with us, or is he? Oh, here he is. Great. Greg Holmes, our finance manager, is going to join us for this item and present the results of Lane County, Oregon's annual comprehensive financial report. And we do have an order associated with this, but we have about a 15-minute staff presentation first. So, do you have a PowerPoint, or it's just the Greg Holmes Show? Great, welcome. Good morning.
Well, good morning, Chair Trigger and commissioners. Joining me we're going to have Moss Adams is joining me remotely. He's representing Moss Adams. He was the auditor on this, and so I'm here to bring the county's award-winning June 30th, 2023 annual comprehensive financial report.
A page turner.
This is a page turner. Thank you, Commissioner Lovell. And so, about 10 days ago, we presented to the Finance and Audit Committee, which is the chair, Commissioner Buck. And 10 days ago, congratulations, during the birth of the grandchild, page turning, Commissioner Farr was there to attend that presentation. And the other member is our elected assessor, Mary Ben. Thank you. So joining that. So that was 10 days ago. The tax levy, we do plan to bring the tax levy presentation with Moss Adams back later in March to present to you with the sheriff, do the scheduling. But we're bringing this report so we can get this report published and printed on the website for our public. And so that's why we're here today. The award is the Government Finance Officers Association's award. It's the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. The county has been awarded this 21 years in a row. We just got the results back on our FY22. It's written in my job description, and we have presented and submitted the June 30th, 2023 for that award as well. So joining me in the audience is Kristen Lidbaum. She is the financial supervisor who's the point person. She has a team of 4 direct reports. She runs the project of taking the budget. So you guys are full in budget. So our financials are based on cash basis. And so her and her team converts it into a modified accrual and then to a full accrual accounting. So there's 3 general ledgers in this report. There's 3 different functionings: modified, full accrual, and even has budget to actual that's in this report. She's documented that this past year, over 2,000 hours from June to November have been put in by her and her staff. A lot of overtime, and I know Kristen was here on weekends. So I appreciate her dedication to getting this report. We're proud of it in Central Finance. And with that, you guys, we hire Moss Adams to come in and give their opinion on this report. And I'm going to hand it over to Kevin Mullerly, who's with Moss Adams, to talk about their role.
I'll go ahead and talk. Good morning, everyone. I'm Kevin Muller-Lally, a senior manager with Moss Adams. I really oversee the audit to make sure that our team is communicating well with Lane County so that we're meeting your requirements to get the audit done in a timely manner. And my colleague Amanda McCleary-Moore is the Moss Adams partner responsible for really doing the final review and signing the audit report that's issued. What I want to talk about briefly is go over our services provided, and then I'll talk about the audit results. What we do is we audit the financial statements for June 30 of 2023. That's all the assets, liabilities, equity, revenue, expenditures, all that information, all the disclosures. As Greg said, it's a very large document. And at the end of the day, we issue a 4-page report on whether or not those financial statements are in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles and that there are no material errors in the statements. We do that audit in accordance with generally accepted government auditing standards. Another piece, and Greg touched on, is regarding the award. That's issued by the Government Finance Officers Association for governments like Lane County that put in the additional time to add all the bells and whistles, such as the statistical section in the back of the document. There's an introductory letter that's submitted. We go through and do additional review to ensure that the county will receive that award. Greg said the award was received in June 2022. And based on a review, we believe that the county will again receive that award for 2023. Another part, separate report that's issued but included in your financial statements is on Oregon minimum standards. So the state says there's a number of Oregon required statutes that you need to follow, such as how you adopt the next year's budget. So we looked at how you adopted your FY24 budget, as well as how you executed the FY23 budget. Other things we look at is how public deposits were held, your procurement process, how you handled highway tax dollars, things like that. So we issue a report on that. And then a final piece of the audit we do is we audit your federal awards. The county receives, quite frankly, a lot more grants in federal contracts than we see from many of the other counties that we're auditing in Oregon. So you do a great job bringing in those dollars, and our job is to audit them, and we issue a report on that. As Greg said, we also do examination on the levy report. Amanda will talk about that when that goes before the board in March. And then ultimately, we're responsible to go over all the results. And as Greg noted, we've already done that with your Finance and Audit Committee in greater detail. This is really to give the highlights of this year's audit engagement. So with that, I'll turn to the audit report that we issued on December 21st, 2023. That met the state's filing deadline of December 31. So hats off to your team, Greg and Kristen, on working those additional hours to meet that deadline. And we issued a clean opinion. So that's the highest level of an audit report that you can receive. So that's great news to hear if you're in the community of Lane County. We also issued a government auditing standards report. What we would put in that report is if you had non-compliance with laws and regulations in a material matter, if there was fraud that we identified, that would go on that report. And we had no non-compliance to report. And then a second component to that report is, are there internal control issues over financial reporting that you need to know about? And we identified no significant matters over internal control. So that was also a clean report. The third final report that we issued that's in that financial statement document is on Oregon minimum standards. And I'm happy to say that there was no non-compliance with the OMS requirements. So that's great news. it's very common for a county to have an over expenditure, at least one over expenditure of any amount. If it's $1, we need to report that. But there were no matters such as that to report. So that third report in the financial statements is also a clean report. Now, the fourth report we're still working on, that is over your federal awards. We just started that in the last few weeks, and the deadline for that report is to submit it to the Fed by March 31st. So we're working with Greg, all the departments that receive those awards, such as Health and Human Services, to make sure that we're going to meet that filing deadline, and we're doing everything we can to get there. And like I said, other report we issued is the tax levy. You know, the good news there, but I'll let Amanda go into more detail at a future commissioner meeting. That's really what I wanted to talk about, and I'll turn it back to the commissioners.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Mr. Holmes. I will entertain any comments or questions from the board. Commissioner Farr.
Thank you. I just want to repeat something that Kevin said, and I think I wrote down the quote pretty accurately. It said, we issued a clean opinion, and that's the highest level you can receive as a government entity. Is that pretty close, Kevin?
Yeah, that's correct.
And I've been hearing you say that for 12 years, so it seems to be a consistent result that you have reported over those 12 years. And I think you and I came to this process about at the same time, about 12 years ago.
Yeah, you're right, Pat. And I can tell you we work with other counties, and we have issued some modified opinions, so not clean reports during that time.
You've always been reluctant to answer my question, are we doing better than everybody else? You've never answered that, but I have my own personal response that I'd like to maintain. So if that's not the correct answer, if my answer is not the correct one, that we are doing better than everybody else, please don't correct me.
You're doing great. So I just say keep it up.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you. Any further comments from staff? Great. I'll just note, while there is Oregon administrative rules and statute that dictates we do this, there's no rule that says how well we have to do. So it's great that that we're able to continue to perform. And I just want to appreciate, of course, our partners at Moss Adams, but they get to do their work because of the incredible work of our staff across departments, because everybody has to contribute the data and the information for you to do your work, Mr. Holmes. So thank you to everyone in the organization who contributes to this stellar performance. And with that, I will entertain a motion.
Yes, Chair, I'd like to move approval of Order 24-02-27-10 in the matter of accepting the Lane County, Oregon Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, ACFR, for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2023.
It has been moved by Vice Chair Lovall, seconded by Commissioner Buck. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor of approval of Order 24-02-27-10 in the matter of presenting the results of the Lane County, Oregon Annual Comprehensive Financial Report, accepting the ACFR for the fiscal year ended June 30, 2023, signify with an aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Thank you, Mr. Holmes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Millery. And we are ahead of schedule. We have a 10 a.m. time certain, and we do have both staff and outside guests. Looking ahead, I don't see anything on our morning agenda that we could move to fill the time, so I'll look to the administrator to see if there might be any announcements or anything he was hoping to bring us this afternoon that would be appropriate this morning.
I have maybe a couple minutes of updates if you'd like me to do those.
Speak slowly, and then we may still be faced with like a 10-minute recess, which we can manage. Great, thank you. Go ahead.
The first is just to let the board know that yesterday we had a meeting, our staff and staff from Assessment Taxation met with representatives from Sierra Pacific. Sierra Pacific is the new owner of what was previously known as Seneca Sawmill. They have a number of, I believe, 3 sawmills in Lane County. The primary location is over 100 acres off of Highway 99 outside of the city of Eugene boundaries, but within the urban growth boundary. And this is just a heads up to let the board know that on, I believe we're shooting for March 19th, and that's still preliminary, to bring an update to the board. We'll have representatives from Sierra Pacific here as they are working on an application to Business Oregon for what's called a SIP. It's sort of like an enterprise, an enterprise area to do property tax deferral on investments, significant investments. In this case, it would be investments over $100 million that would be, property tax would be deferred for up to 15 years. And there are a lot of different parameters that go with that. There is what's called a community service fee that they would pay that is a total of about 50% of the total tax over that period of time. 25% approximately would go to Lane County, and then the remainder would go to the school district in the area, which is the Bethel School District. So we're going to have that just sort of an update for the board, and the plan is to do that March 19th, and then there will be the need for a public hearing. This is under the state law for the application for the SIP that they submit with Business Oregon. It requires an agreement with the local government jurisdiction, which is Lane County in this case. We'll need to do a public hearing on that agreement, and then ultimately the board would need to approve that agreement. So they would like to have all of that done by June, which is a really tight time frame to do all of this work, but we're going to do our best to meet that time frame. So I just wanted to let the board know about that. So, and of course, the chair and vice chair will be part of setting the agenda for that meeting. But just because it's about a $250 million investment that they're looking at making in that property. And again, you'll hear more about that and opportunities to speak with representatives from Sierra Pacific. But I want to share that with you. Then you can ask questions. I probably could answer a couple more things than what I just shared, but not great detail. The other item, just really some good news I wanted to share with the board. I think you all received this letter from the superintendents of Lane County's 17 school and educational service districts. The Lane Education Service District and its 17 superintendents that it represents. Sent a letter to various jurisdictions, including Lane County, just recognizing the great work of our crews, in particular our road crews, as well as our human services team, in response and recovery to the ice storm that we had in January. And it was noted that our road crews in particular performed outstanding work in opening all of our 1,400 miles of roads within 5 days of that storm hitting. And so the 17 associated school districts were grateful for the response, the professionalism, and dedication of Lane County Public Works and other county agencies that they showed during that event to the impacted school districts during the ice storm. Just a couple comments from that letter I wanted to share here with the board that says that we, the superintendents of Lane County's 17 school and education service districts, are writing to thank Lane County and the individuals who have led and supported storm recovery efforts. County transportation departments and road crews assessed, triaged, repaired many landslides, downed trees, branches, and power lines and floods. They were required to revisit previously cleared areas during the second round of icy rain and then the thaw. Road crews coordinated seamlessly, expediting repairs and limiting impacts on traffic as roads opened. All of these agencies, Lane County and its partners, have gone above and beyond to support our communities and coordinate between agencies to provide relief where needed. Thank you. So I just wanted to share that with the board. In the aftermath, we continue to do, we had our hot wash meeting with internal staff. Tiffany Brown, our new emergency manager for Lane County, is working on coordinating a broader community-wide debriefing effort, and so we will be having that and partnering with the various agencies to continue to learn what went well and what needs improvement for future response efforts, but wanted to just highlight some appreciation there from our, particularly from our outlying school districts in Lane County.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Along the lines of this letter, which I want to appreciate from all the school districts, I think we all know how dedicated our staff is, especially in Public Works and in all the response to our emergency needs that come in the county. So they definitely deserve that letter. In addition, it would be really fruitful to have some more in-depth conversations with each of these districts to help support their schools as resiliency hubs within the communities. Some are able to do that if their building isn't flooded, like some were this time, and some already do that. However, many do not, and many don't have the capability to do that. And in these kinds of storms, our residents look to community centers to go to, and the schools in our communities are the ones that are large enough to be able to house the kind of people in numbers that we could potentially see in these disasters. It would be really a wonderful conversation to be able to merge emergency management, resiliency hubs, and updates to those schools throughout our communities and throughout Lane County. Not only will it shore up some of their capital needs, but it would also shore up the needs of our residents. So eventually they will be able to know which schools they can go to within a disaster like we've just seen. So I don't know if that's something that our emergency manager is tasked with, but that is something I would highly recommend. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Farr.
And thank you, Ms. Morgrassi, for a great report. But I'm going to respond to you, Commissioner Buck. Spot on. You know, I mean, people in our community, we have great schools in virtually every corner of the county with facilities that are open sometimes, not open sometimes. And quite often people see an empty building in a time of an emergency and say, why can't I go in that building? Well, there are reasons, absolutely. But how do we address those reasons, help the districts get past those reasons and really perform to a level that I know they want to, you know, especially the smaller districts. Earlier mentioned Bethel School District. The entirety of Bethel School District is inside of my district. I don't own the Bethel School District, but it can be a tremendous asset in times of emergency and other times, we know that. So I'm in support of what you have to say, and let's look at that. Let's see how we can move that forward for the future. Thank you, Chair.
Well, we did our best, and here we are still with 10 minutes. Yeah.
One backseat.
Yeah.
I did a bad thing in using an acronym without defining what the acronym is. I said SIP, and I didn't say what the SIP is. So you may be asking yourself, or others that are watching this may go, well, what is a SIP? SIPS is a state program that stands for Strategic Investment Program. So Jenna Cusimano from our Community and Economic Development Office wisely reminded me to tell you that SIP stands for Strategic Investment Program. Again, it's sort of like an enterprise zone area where it's an opportunity to go through the needed requirements under state law to seek property tax deferral. So it's around a significant investment. There are a lot of rules attached to it, but SIP stands for Strategic Investment Program.
Thank you for that. Thank you to Ms. Cusimano for tracking that, and I look forward to our Community Economic Development team joining us sometime soon to kind of tie all these, right? We've been talking about a lot of different things that impact, or that are impacted by our strategic direction on economic development, so that's great. Thank you for that. I suggest then we take a 10-minute recess. Please keep your eye on the clock so that we will have guests from outside as well as staff presenting, so maybe if we could come back here in about 8.5 minutes so we're all ready to go. And Tanya, with that, let's go on a recess, please. Thank you.
And as you file by, take a quick look at what's on my screen. As you file by.
the regular meeting of the Board of County Commissioners for Tuesday, February 27th. And I will welcome our Equity Manager, Latife Amato, to the table for this next item, which is a report on the annual Lane County Hate and Bias Report. And I'll have you introduce the panel. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you. Well, good morning, Chair Trieger. Good morning, Vice Chair Lovell and Commissioners. Well, thank you for the opportunity to bring forward our first annual report on hate and bias. We're really excited to be here. We have a lovely panel of experts here today. This report is a result of the Order 23-080806, which acknowledged Pride Month and committed to an annual review of hate and bias data. So here we are today with that. With me today are folks from 3 different agencies. We have Lieutenant Speldridge from the Lane County Sheriff's Office, Johanna Costa from the Oregon Department of Justice, Cynthia Aguilar Arismendi from the Western State Center, and Amy Herselt-Koppel, who is online, also from the Western State Center. And before I pass it on to the panelists, I want to make a couple things clear. One, we will not be discussing specific cases or specific case in Lane County. We're really just focusing on trends across the county. I also want to clarify that while we're coming together as 3 distinct agencies for the purpose of this presentation, we only speak for our individual agencies. And our hope is that this report supports you as our leaders, both from a preventative lens, but also from a responsive lens in how we address these issues in our community. So with that, I'll pass it over to Lieutenant Tom Speldridge.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. I get the honor of outlining what the Sheriff's Office is doing. I also get to kind of show some definitions as far as what we're operating on, and then statutes of the law we're going to talk a little bit about. To start with, bias crimes in their nature are somewhat of a demonstration of a disregard for what I consider to be a basic human right. As such, we take bias crime very seriously at the Sheriff's Office, and that's not only written in policy, but it's practiced on a day-to-day basis. As such, we do have a general order that specifically addresses bias crimes in the investigations and how we will conduct those investigations. And as such, this active role that we take in protecting our community involves our policies and procedures state that we will promptly and thoroughly investigate these types of crimes to the fullest extent that we can. So bias crimes are placed rather high on our priority list. As such, really bias crimes in their nature are, showing a disregard for a very, if not the most basic human right. That's why we take it so seriously. So the Sheriff's Office, we have our own definition of what a bias crime is. This definition is written in accordance with the Oregon Revised Statutes so that it lines up properly with the criminal ORSs regarding such. And we define a bias crime at the Sheriff's Office as an incident where an offender's motivation for committing an offense is based on the offender's perception of the victim's race, color, religion, national origin, sexual orientation, disability, or gender identity. Like I said, that's in accordance with the Oregon Revised Statutes. We've got basically 2 criminal statutes that we're able to operate under bias crime on, and I gotta tell you, this actually first one, it says bias crime in the 1st degree. We're going to talk first about bias crime in the 2nd degree. The text is proper. Other than that, 1 should be a 2 up there. The first criminal statute we're going to talk about real quick is going to be bias crime in the 2nd degree, and there's some elements of 2nd degree bias crime that we have to meet, just like any statute. We've got to, in order to make the crime fit, in order to prove a case, we have to be able to establish the fact pattern has to match what is in the language of the law. So 2nd degree bias crime, which is an A misdemeanor, is when a person tampers or interferes with property, and that tampering or that interfering with property has to do with the actor's perception of the other person's race, color, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, or national origin. We're operating under those standards right there. Also, it could be bias crime in the 2nd degree if a person subjects another person to offensive physical contact. Offensive physical contact doesn't mean injury. Offensive physical contact would be like if I was to shove somebody and they were not to be injured, it's still contact that's offensive and unwelcomed. If I were to do that because of my perception of that of that person's race, color, religion, etc., that would qualify as a bias crime in the second degree. So not only would we have the criminal statute of physical harassment for just shoving anybody, that would be a physical harassment. If I did it because of the bias, then we also have this additional crime of bias in the second degree. Another way that we can get to bias crime in the second degree is if a person were to threaten the following actions based upon those discriminating factors. And if that would be if you were to threaten to cause a serious physical injury or to commit a felony, if you were going to threaten that you were going to rob somebody because of their race or et cetera, or a person of the family of the victim could also qualify there. Also to cause substantial damage to the property of the other person or a member of their family. So if an actor were to cause massive graffiti to a family member or to the victim themselves, that would qualify as bias crime in the second degree. So now, bias crime in the first degree, again, I've got my numbers reversed there. Bias crime in the first degree is a C felony, and this is, this is ramped up acting a little bit. This would be if a person were to cause a physical injury, whether intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly, causing physical injury to another person, so an assault. If an actor were to assault somebody because of their race or religion, etc., then that automatically becomes a C felony. Whereas the assault by itself may just be a lower level assault, a misdemeanor assault, but because of the bias involved in that, if we can show that there is an intention to cause that assault because of the actor's perception of the victim, then it becomes a C felony. Also, kind of a little more rare circumstance would be the second one. Another way you could get to bias crime in the first degree would be if the actor with criminal negligence causes a physical injury to another person by means of a deadly weapon. Again, this is a higher level of crime, and this crime tacks on top of whatever other crime they committed. So an assault by itself, menacing by itself, those are laws that we already have that don't have to do with bias, but if in the course of that investigation we're able to uncover that they occurred because of a bias by the actor, then we've got these additional crimes that we're able to charge on top of that. So our deputies have some specific responsibilities that are outlined when responding to bias crimes. First and foremost, we're going to respond to all of them. And we're going to notify our on-duty supervisor. I talked about this being a high-level priority crime for us. Subsequent to that, our process at the sheriff's office is if we've got a report of a bias crime, the deputy is to report that to their supervisor, and then the supervisor actually sends out messaging to all of the command staff at the sheriff's office above in the police services division to let us know where that's at. We take these cases so seriously that our entire police command structure is notified when we have an allegation of a bias crime. So we respond to all the incidents, of course. We do have instructions, for our deputies to, of course, be sensitive and professional in the way that they handle it. For instance, they may have to write a derogatory term in their report. They may have to testify to that term later in court. It's not a term that once it's said and put in the notebook, it's not one that's generally would be encouraged to be repeated, during the course of the investigation. Also, as with any criminal investigation, our deputies, are expected to preserve the scene and gather any evidence. And we also have a policy that reports involving bias crime should be completed prior to the end of that deputy's shift. So these reports don't sit and wait. These are ones that we're actively tracking, actively working. We want them to be worked as expeditiously and thoroughly as possible. Okay, some factors, though, that we have to consider and our deputies have to consider, really the difference between a regular assault and a bias assault, or the difference between a regular, graffiti incident or a bias graffiti incident, it all falls into the motivations of the perpetrator. And so oftentimes we come across a challenge of establishing the motivation of a perpetrator. as such, there are certain things that make it easier to know the motivations. A racial slur or a religious slur painted on the side of a building makes it pretty clear to us that that it has to do with the intentions of the actor. However, if a car window gets broken and the victim happens to be of a minority, or you know, the victim may perceive that it happened because of a bias, we have to go down the path of being able to establish that it was. We can't charge the bias crime unless we're able to put a case, first probable cause for arrest, but then also we have to consider being able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt in court the intentions of the actor. So that would be the number one most common hurdle that we have in charging bias crimes, is we have to basically be able to prove a snapshot in the mind of the actor. Sometimes it's easy. With graffiti cases, it's often easy. But other times, you know, where maybe there's an assault at a 7-Eleven, we have to take into factor what are witnesses hearing and saying. Was there any slurs that were said, or, you know, has this person who committed the crime, are they affiliated with a group that is known to, you know, have biases and act upon those biases? Also, other factors that can play into that we can use as evidence is, you know, the date and time of occurrence. You know, if a graffiti incident happens or an assault incident happens at a religious gathering that's known by that religion to be, you know, one of their sacred days, and an outsider that's affiliated with a hate group comes in and interrupts that, that's a lot easier for us to prove than kind of the random, you know, incident that happens, you know, that's not associated with such an established fact pattern. So, you know, in closing, I guess I would say that, you know, the Sheriff's Office, we take these we're very proud of our community, and we want Lane County to be a place not only to live, but to visit. And we take bias crimes very seriously, from the bottom, you know, investigating deputy, all the way to the top through the sheriff. You know, these incidents are tracked and followed through. You know, as such, we train our employees specifically to recognize and investigate bias crimes to the fullest extent that the law allows us. And we do review all of these cases, and the ones that show criminal elements, all of them will get sent to the district attorney's office for consideration of criminal charges. Thank you.
Renata, do you want questions per panelist? Do you want to get through your whole presentation? What works best for your?
Well, we have about, I think it would be at the end, if that's okay with everybody. Sure. Does that work?
Yep.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you so much for having us here today. My name is Johanna Costa. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I work at the Oregon Department of Justice as the Civil Rights Coordinator. We have two programs. We have our Sanctuary Promise program, and I'm here to talk today about our Bias Response Hotline. I'm joined by a colleague, Simon Lee, from our Criminal Justice Division. He's our Bias Crime Resource Prosecutor, and he lives locally, so he joined me today. Thanks, Simon. So Latife had asked me to come and speak specifically about our statewide hotline, which is designed to be a confidential place for folks to report hate crimes and bias incidents across the state and be connected to resources. I of course, want to flag that we will, by nature of this presentation, be talking about some difficult and offensive things, so just flagging a content warning. So in Oregon, in the last 5 years, we've had two landmark pieces of legislation leading the nation, as we have since 1981, when we were the first state to pass hate crime laws in the United States. In 2019, the Oregon legislature passed Senate Bill 577, and this piece of legislation actually touched on 17 different laws, created one new whole section of our ORSs, and specifically created a hotline where folks can call and report a hate crime or a bias incident. Our 7 protected classes that the lieutenant had mentioned are listed up on the screen. Of course, there are protected classes in other statutes beyond these 7. For example, my age or my housing status may be protected in my employment setting or when I go to my doctor's office. But under our hate crime and bias incident laws, there are 7 protected classes. And these are the visible, often visible, immutable aspects of identity that we cannot change, that are at the core of who we are. And as the lieutenant said, you know, bias crimes and bias incidents strike at the very core of our human rights, and that's the right to belong and to feel safe in our communities, to be welcome and celebrated for just as we are, not in spite of, but just as we are. And so those 7 protected classes are race, color, religion. Gender identity was added in 2019 as a distinct protected class in Oregon. Sexual orientation, disability, and national origin. And on our website, if you're curious about the history of our laws, I mentioned that we were the first state in the nation to pass hate crime laws back in 1981. We have a whole history of the changes in Oregon's laws over the last 40-plus years. The lieutenant spoke about hate crimes or bias crimes. This piece of legislation, Senate Bill 577, created a new legal term in Oregon called a bias incident, which is a non-criminal hostile expression of animus that can be extremely scary. It is certainly othering and alienating. It is intended to degrade and humiliate and has significant impact, similar to criminal conduct, and yet it is not prosecutable under Oregon law. So a bias incident is that hostile expression of animus. It could be hate speech. It could be waving flags that intend to again, degrade or others. It could be mimicking or mocking, refusing someone's service. We don't serve your kind here. You're not welcome here. Discriminatory treatment, offensive jokes, and I use quotations around that word jokes. They're not funny at all. Repeatedly misgendering someone or calling someone's sexual orientation political or a lifestyle choice. So those are some examples of bias incidents. And those are now reportable to our Oregon Bias Response Hotline, where folks can receive services, be connected to support, and learn about their options. Bias incidents are non-criminal. They are not something that someone can go to jail for doing, and yet the victim and the wider community of folks who are targeted with that speech, with that flag waving, with that othering, are harmed. And government has a responsibility. It's back into our Constitution. If you go to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, government cannot restrict speech, and yet everyone shall be responsible when our free speech rights are taken too far, when our code of conduct, our civility conduct is violated in this state. The lieutenant reviewed bias crimes. I will flag that one of the pieces of this Senate Bill 577 added a requirement for law enforcement to refer folks to services when someone picks up the phone and reports a bias incident to law enforcement, so that we know that most folks don't ever report bias crimes or bias incidents. It has the lowest reporting rate of vulnerable victimization across domestic violence, elder abuse, child abuse, sexual assault. Bias crime victims do not report, and if they do, this law requires law enforcement. It's not a you probably should or it's best practice. It's a shall refer folks to services. That can be local services, that can be the statewide hotline. We have a bunch of materials out in the lobby, law enforcement referral cards, brochures in 30 different languages for folks to use both in community and law enforcement settings to make that referral. But that requirement is for bias incidents. So historically, if someone were to pick up the phone and say, hey, my neighbor just called me this slur, law enforcement might say, I'm so sorry that happened. Unfortunately, that's a civil matter. There's nothing that I can do about it. And now law enforcement is required to say, and I have a resource for you, and there's a place where you can receive support. It may not be crime, but we actually have federal and state rights to live in housing free from discrimination. It may be a civil rights violation. Not a crime where someone can go to jail, but a civil rights violation where a landlord would have to act and make sure that tenant has an opportunity to have a housing environment free from discrimination. So there are options, and that's our role on the hotline, is to make sure that folks know what those options are.
Just really briefly, when was that bill passed and when was it enacted?
Senate Bill 577 passed in 2019, and it went into effect upon signing of the governor's signature, so it was July 2019 that it went into effect. So our bias response hotline is 1-844-924-BIAS or standagainst-hate.oregon.gov. Our advocates are bi and multilingual. We of course make accessibility accommodations for folks. You can chat with us. You can make a web portal report. You can talk with us on the phone. The second piece of landmark legislation that I wanted to touch on was actually just this last legislative session, House Bill 3443. This piece of legislation, again, did a number of different things, but we, as a state and the legislature and frankly dominant culture has begun to recognize the work that we need to do to support folks who are victimized based on perception of their protected class. So for decades now, we've had certain protections for domestic and sexual violence victims and trafficking victims, as we should. And this last round of legislation elevated bias crime victims to receive those same protections. Eligibility for address confidentiality program, eligibility to break a lease, protected leave from work, eligibility for safe leave and paid leave Oregon, just as domestic and sexual violence victims are, as should bias crime victims have those resources available to them. I mentioned there are a number of things that we do on the hotline, including talking with folks about their civil rights options, eligibility for address confidentiality programs, civil protective orders, getting to safety. One of the key resources on our hotline is our emergency fund. It's a small fund where we can help folks with safety. We have paid for many security cameras, helped folks relocate, repaired property that has been vandalized with hate speech and symbols. So really trying to work towards emotional and physical safety for survivors. Latife had asked me to speak a little bit about data. We have a data dashboard on our website at standagainst-hate.oregon.gov. It is active or updated through June of 2023. We try to keep it real-time updated, but we are updated through about 7 months ago now. For Lane County specifically, through June of 2023, you can see that reporting has significantly increased. I want to flag that reporting is a reflection of what folks are willing to share, not what is actually happening in our communities. We know that we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. Last year in 2023, we had 668 reports from Lane County alone. That is a significant surge from 2022, up 273% from the previous year. Lane County constitutes about 9% of Oregon's population and about 19% of the reports received on the hotline. I've broken down the conduct reported to us. Last year, we had 353 bias incidents reported, those non-criminal targeting. We had 147 bias crimes reported to us and 72 felony bias crimes reported to the hotline. There's very little overlap with law enforcement in these numbers. With some law enforcement agencies, we have a specific referral process, but the hotline is designed to center survivors and victims and allow them choice, and that choice includes whether or not to report to law enforcement. If folks want to report to law enforcement, we absolutely make those connections. And again, we have a referral process with many law enforcement agencies to get these reports directly to the investigators. Within those 668 reports, We had 356 reports of harassment, 101 reports of vandalism, reports of institutional bias, assault, doxing, swatting, refusal of service, and exploitation based on protected class. Those protected classes, again, reported targeting in Lane County. We had 248 reports of race-based targeting, 220 reports of religious-based targeting, and I'm just highlighting a few, and 74 reports each of national origin and sexual orientation-based bias.
And can you just clarify, are those unduplicated, or might there be one person who, one incident that meets multiple categories?
Great question. Yeah, these are intersectional. So
Thank you.
someone may report being targeted based on race and color or race and national origin.
Thank you.
Again, a select protected class breakdown, as with, has been consistent since the hotline has opened. Anti-Black and African-American targeting leads all reporting in the state, as it does across the nation. We have a long history in this country and in this state of anti-Blackness. And in Lane County specifically, we had a huge surge of anti-Semitic reporting this last year. A huge surge in targeting and a huge surge in reporting. And some additional trends that I'll just flag, we had 18 hate flyering campaigns in Oregon last year. So handing out flyers across neighborhoods, throwing baggies out cards with hateful messaging. And six of those 18 were in Lane County. We had 6 Zoom bombing events last year in Oregon, and 4 of those were in Lane County. And all but 2 of those, so out of those 24, all but 2 were anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic targeting.
Sorry, for those of us that don't know what a Zoom bombing is, could you clarify that?
Yes, Zoom bombing is when there's an online meeting or forum being held,
Gotcha, okay.
and a nefarious actor breaks into that event with a fake name and potentially a alternated voice, and spews hate speech and spreads hateful messaging.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. The additional trends that we've seen in Lane County include extremism, which Cynthia will be speaking about, targeting in school-based settings, in libraries, including book bans, anti-LGBTQIA2S+ targeting, and anti-Jewish targeting, and that includes before October 7th. And the Hamas invasion of Israel. So I talk about data, but I want to flag that we're talking about real human beings, real people whose lives have been turned upside down. They feel that they can't leave their homes. They're not safe going to work. They're scared being out in the community. And the purpose of the hotline is try to restore some of that safety and humanity for folks, and to, again, make sure that they are aware of what options they have. So flagging a couple of things that real folks have shared with us. We do a lot of outreach and events. We welcome the opportunity to come out. We did a number of events just spreading the word about the hotline here in Lane County last year. My bottom line messaging is that we all have a role to play in terms of making our communities safe for everyone, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come share with you today.
Just while you're setting up, I'll ask, can we get the slide presentation sent to Tanya so she can upload them? They're not with our materials right as of now on the agenda.
Got it. They were sent. Yes, she should be able to.
Great, thank you. Just so the public watching later can also pull them up and track these. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Cynthia Aguilar Arizmendi, and I am the Rapid Response Manager at Western State Center. Thank you for the opportunity to present. I live right here in Eugene, so it feels extra special to be able to talk to you all about Western State Center's work, and we understand the importance of your report and are pleased to share our resources and are grateful for the Board of Commissioners' leadership right here in Lane County. Our ED, Amy, could not be here today in person, but she is joining us online and will be available for questions right after the presentation. So a little bit about our organization. Western State Center has been around since 1987 and serves as a movement building, leadership development, and strategy hub to engage partners who are committed to strengthening inclusive democracy. So we take regional action for national impact is the way we like to put it. So through our national flagship program Momentum, we monitor anti-democracy and bigoted social movements right here in our region, and we equip civil society leaders, organizations, elected officials, and local government to respond effectively with creative strategies that strengthen democratic practice while closing space for political violence. So this includes trainings and briefings for community partners, municipal leaders, lawmakers, and elections administrators on the goals and tactics of white nationalist and aligned unlawful paramilitary groups. So we have a number of tools online and resources on our website that I would encourage you all to take a look at. I did bring a couple of copies of some of our toolkits. Unfortunately, I only brought one, but I'm told that you all will probably pass it around, so feel free to share and please take a look for your reference. So as I mentioned, once again, my name is Cynthia Aguilar Arizmendi. I am the Rapid Response Manager at WSC. Some of the work that I do includes providing rapid response support for organizations, advocates, leaders, and organizers who have been targeted by anti-democracy groups. So this can include connecting people with resources, help, and working together to outline next steps. So once again, our ED, Amy, is joining us via Zoom here today. Here is an overview of some of the items we'll be going over today. For our brief presentation, I'd like to focus on 4 key trends in recent activity from anti-democracy and bigoted movements active right here in Oregon. For the 4 themes that we'll dig into include increasing threats, both online and in person, targeting community leaders, democratic institutions, and local elected officials. We are also going to take a look at which anti-democracy groups are most active here in Oregon and the region and their tactics. The common and disturbing tactic of targeting women, particularly women of color, in community and elected leadership roles by anti-democracy groups. And finally, we'll talk about the prevalence of Zoom bombing and attempted disruption of online spaces, particularly public meetings. So by these anti-democracy and bigoted groups. So threats and intimidation are a key tactic of bigoted and anti-democracy movements to undermine the legitimacy and effectiveness of democratic institutions. They create, frankly, a chilling effect, especially for communities that are directly targeted. And sadly, this has been an effective tactic at pushing leaders out of the public life. Most often women, people of color, LGBTQ plus people, with an especially outsized impact on women of color. The most recent report from last month from the Bridging Divides Initiative at Princeton University shows that threats and harassment of local elected officials remains at a consistently high baseline, with nearly 1 in 6 threatened. So these threats are even more common for elected officials with marginalized identities, with 2 out of 5 women experiencing harassment compared to around a third of men. And the worry about threats, harassment, and attacks is substantially higher. So with 13% of local officials expressing worry about them or their families being attacked. So this creates a big safety issue for a lot of folks. So tactics like spreading misinformation about leaders, doxing them, which is the releasing of personal information, and threatening their families are dangerous. And while it's difficult enough to deal with this as an elected official with resources, this is also happening to student and community leaders with far fewer resources. Institutions like schools, libraries, and hospitals have all experienced threats of violence directly, as well as sometimes being forced to shut down entirely. In all of these cases, this threatens resources used for an entire community and can fracture social cohesion. So this quote right here tells us a lot about how threats and misinformation start in the far-right media ecosystem and kind of spread from there. Steve Bannon is talking about the role of Jim Hoft, who is the founder of Gateway Pundit, and his outlet in incubating mis and disinformation. They framed the story and they have a wide range and reach. So I understand that y'all will get this back, the presentation later if you want to take a look at the whole quote. So we know that our region has been a proving ground for anti-democracy, white nationalist, and paramilitary movements for more than 4 decades. So what do we mean when we talk about white nationalism and anti-democracy movements? So I want to get really clear about what we mean by that. White nationalism is a social movement and has the goal of building political power to create a white ethno-state. This is distinct from the historic system of white supremacy, and this was formed after the civil rights movement as a backlash to the social and political gains that were being made by Black Americans and other marginalized groups in the United States. Anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and fear of demographic change is at its ideological core, and it relies heavily on all forms of bigotry, including racism, anti-immigrant bigotry, Islamophobia, misogyny, homophobia, and transphobia as well. So when we talk about anti-democracy movements, we also mean that they are fundamentally opposed to a democracy that represents everyone. Now, that doesn't mean they don't engage with democratic processes as a way to build power, but they're still geared toward undermining democracy even when they do engage with these processes. So this includes disrupting the functioning of a democratically elected government in order to discredit it while bolstering the appeal of authoritarianism and bigotry. And conspiracy theories also play a critical role in these movements. They reinforce bigoted narratives, they provide an alternate explanation for how power is exercised and how change happens not using democracy, and they accelerate recruitment and help these movements reach a far broader audience. So these movements rely on threats, violence, and intimidation to get their message across. It is an umbrella term for a big tent authoritarian coalition that includes unlawful paramilitary organizations, groups like the Proud Boys, and many who describe themselves as Patriot Movement. Some anti-democracy groups like Greater Idaho may not be white nationalists, but don't typically reject white nationalists who want to join their coalition. So some active groups here in the Pacific Northwest include the People Rights Network that was founded by Eamon Bundy. And the PRN is made up of Bundy supporters who claim that their goal is to push back against government tyranny. Bundy has also led his followers to engage in any number of anti-government demonstrations rooted in sovereign citizen ideology. In 2021, Bundy claimed PRN had expanded to 50,000 members in 35 states in the United States. And although the exact number is not clear, it is a network that is loosely organized within each state. Each state will have a state assistant that manages a designated state. In August, People's Rights Oregon 5, which is the Central Oregon local branch, purchased a 2.75-acre property in Terrebonne. And BJ Sopern is the PRN area assistant and former Central Oregon Constitutional Guard leader. So the Northwest Nationalist Network, also known as 3N, is an increasingly active coalition of white supremacist groups based in the Pacific Northwest. This network was formed in early 2023 and is heavily focused on public demonstrations as well as coordinated flyer distribution campaigns that are in support of white nationalist beliefs. So groups that make up the 3N include Evergreen Active Club, the Rose City Nationalists, the Cascadia Nationalists, and the Northwest Front. Within the 3N groups, they draw inspiration from active club models, which operate under the guise of being fitness clubs. Members prioritize physical fitness with the idea that they will need to prepare for situations where they will need to engage in political violence to advance their racist agenda rooted in white supremacist ideology. In recent months, the group has targeted and focused much of their attention on protesting racial justice demonstrations and LGBTQ plus events. We know that anti-democracy groups view women, and especially women of color, as prime targets. We've seen that nationally, with Harvard's former dean being one example, but we know it's happening at the local level too. And in 2021, Creswell Mayor Amy Knudsen resigned after she publicly issued citations to organizers of an unpermitted 4th of July event that included members of the Proud Boys. Knudsen's home was subsequently shared online, which led to threats, and she eventually cited undue stress as her reason for deciding to step down. And in 2022, Scott Stewart failed to win his race for Deschutes County Commissioner. During his campaign, it came to light that he emailed the Redmond School District Board advocating for a return of the gallows after accusing Governor Kate Brown of treason. And in Clackamas County, just up north, the county GOP was taken over by anti-democracy figures last year, and the vice chair of the GOP is one of Oregon's most prominent Proud Boys, Dan Tooze. Now, we could go on all day about the ways that these groups make their way into various parts of our society, but we'd be here all day. So these are just a few examples of what we're facing here locally. In recent years, incidents of racist Zoom bombings have increased across Oregon, from city council meetings in Eugene to racist raids on University of Oregon Zoom calls. Virtual spaces have become a target and a breeding ground for bigoted anti-democracy actors. In places like the Dalles, the city council implemented new measures requiring pre-registration in order to speak at meetings because the problem just got so bad. The move came after anonymous callers hijacked meetings to spew racist anti-Semitic remarks at their meetings. And the adoption of Zoom targeting appears to go hand in hand with coordinated flyering campaigns that have also been spotted across the state. In communities like Corvallis, anti-Semitic and anti-democracy groups have targeted entire communities with racist flyers. And just last month, over the weekend of January 6th, the GDL sent flyers to Corvallis city councilors' home addresses. So thank you for the opportunity to present here, and I'll pass it back to Latife for next steps.
Yeah, we'll just open it up for questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you to the whole panel for that really important and sobering report, and I will open it up. I have some questions and comments, but I want to hear from the rest of the board first. Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Trigger, and thank you for some very clarifying interjection questions that I think we're all asking that same question. Thank you for bringing those up during the presentation. Thank you for a great presentation. You know, I so many questions to ask and no time to ask all of them, so I'm going to just ask one that really is pressing for me, and that is the distinction between youth and adults. For instance, let's go to a second grade class where a second grader is, let's say, for instance, assaulting another second grader's gender identity very aggressively and physically. What are the recommendations for recourse on that? Now, we understand school districts have their responsibilities, and some maybe accept their responsibilities higher than others, filters down to the classroom, but then it goes also back to the parents, both parents who may be involved in such an incident. What's the recourse for that? And pardon me for switching this directly to youth, but I think that youth are the most vulnerable. Kids.
Thank you, Commissioner. I can speak a little bit to that. I mean, certainly on the hotline, we would talk through a parent, with a parent, what their options may be. It is one of our federally and state protected rights to receive an education free from discrimination. And so the school actually has civil rights obligations to provide for the child in the classroom. In terms of, so that could look like a number of different changes for the child being targeted. and for the child acting out. This is learned behavior, and so, you know, a 7-year-old engaging in that type of conduct, there are not criminal consequences generally, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but age 12 is when, say, the juvenile department would likely get involved. Lieutenant?
Yeah, you know, certainly at that age, probably to have any type of criminal intervention is not going to be an option. It may still get referred, you know, but certainly probably the juvenile court is not going to be stepping in at that age. So.
But there are Oregon administrative rules that require, there's a every student belongs administrative rule in Oregon that requires school to have reporting and safety processes for children, but also investigates that type of conduct and provides age-appropriate education and redirection for the child. So is it learning about, well, you know, what are our differences? Why, you know, why is it that, you know, a child may express gender one way that's separate and different from what we experience in our household? And I'm not a second grade teacher. I don't know all the age appropriate, but there's a curriculum offered through a number of resources around what is age appropriate education around this, and how can we redirect and provide some education to someone who is sort of going down that road. There's a great resource, there are several great resources in our community toolkit around you know, redirecting young folks and adults who may be going down a path of extremism. So, yeah.
Thank you. That reassures me that there are structures in place, but I do worry about particularly kids under 12 years old at the very most vulnerable in life, where they're being maybe bullied on the playground outside of the attention of teachers and not willing to report it to anyone because they feel so internalized by it and so affected by it and so deeply hurt by it. So I believe the structures are in place, but I think it's something that we need to explore further, is how do we reinforce in schools in particular, but also outside of the schools with those age groups, how do we reinforce the structures that are in place to give children the fortitude, the courage to step forward when something is happening to them? Thank you.
Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the discussion. And we, as you mentioned, we've had an unfortunate string of events of anti-Semitic flyers and pouches and whatnot a number of times over the last year here in Lane County. My question is, how do we go about investigating those? Because honestly, I haven't heard of anybody being held responsible for any of that. And for me, that's just not acceptable, but I don't know, you know, we have cameras all over this place. It seems like somebody would have saw something somewhere to lead to an investigation of some kind. Maybe there has been, and I'm not aware of it. But honestly, that information doesn't necessarily come back to us to know how it is ultimately investigated, resolved, or had people, you know, actually held responsible for those actions.
Yeah, I can speak to that just a little bit, Commissioner. You know, I think sometimes we get this perception that nothing happened or an investigation didn't get completed, because when an incident occurs, it tends to be the hot topic and it's talked about a lot. And then it kind of falls off of the radar of the media. It falls off of the public forum a little bit, and it's not as spoken about. Whereas, you know, oftentimes, like I said, there's some hurdles that we have to investigate fully when it comes to bias crimes. We have to prove the intent of the actor, and so sometimes that can take a little bit of time, a little bit of background, you know, into that person and into the merits of that case. And so a lot of times these are not super fast resolved cases where we're able to reach a level of prosecution within the immediate days to where that incident is still popular in the speech forum. So when the case is referred and then finally adjudicated, oftentimes it doesn't have the popularity, or it doesn't get, I guess, brought about, the resolution doesn't get brought about like it would otherwise. And then sometimes the cases that are initially thought, all indicators in the front was that it was a bias crime, but for whatever reason, we're not able to meet one of those qualifiers to make it a bias crime, but we are able to, say, still have a good harassment or a good criminal mischief case. It wouldn't then at that point, when it's resolved, it wouldn't then be flagged as what was originally reported as a bias crime. So we would think nothing happened, wherein in fact, something still may have happened for those slashed tires, or something may have happened for that assault, but the conviction may be that it was an assault conviction or a criminal mischief conviction, and the bias crime, wasn't able to be proven.
I see, if we could get the full screen back and make it a little easier, I see Ms. Hersfeld-Koppel has her hand up, and if it's in regards to this question, I'd love to call on her.
Yes, thank you so much. I just wanted to jump in briefly. Obviously, acts of vandalism and hate firing is a really common tactic of bigoted and anti-democracy groups in Oregon, and we see, several incidents of this kind of hate firing. Want to be clear that this is a tactic that is designed to intimidate communities by making these groups appear as if they are larger than they probably are. They also, of course, have a chilling effect with the end goal of silencing leaders. And there have been a number of creative responses, including last year in February, when anti-Semitic flyers were found in Springfield and Eugene, within a week, local groups Calc and Surge and neighborhood associations conducted counter-flyering and door-knocking campaigns with messages of love and hope. So I wanted to infuse that there are often really courageous community responses in addition to appropriate law enforcement responses. Another common act of vandalism by anti-democracy groups is damaging murals, particularly murals and public art with racial justice themes throughout the region. We've worked in the past to document examples of that kind of vandalism by a white nationalist propaganda group called Patriot Front that actually led to a civil suit brought by the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. And one final thing I wanted to note is a favorite example from 2022 when the Tillamook County Sheriff issued citations for every single Goyim Defense League flyer that was left on cars in a grocery store parking lot. GDL is a very prolific anti-Semitic propaganda group that primarily engages in these sort of flyer and sticker drops. And while there wasn't a violation of civil rights law, the local sheriff realized that there was a violation of the municipal ordinance that you had to have permission to leave things on people's cars. So I thought that was a good example of there being, an existing law to enforce. Thank you.
Cheesemakers were
Thank
sharp.
you very much.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Other comments from Commissioner Seneca?
Yeah, and kind of a couple of these points. Lieutenant Speldridge, do we know how many reports or how many investigations our sheriff's department does a year on bias crimes? I didn't see that number.
Yeah, no, I should have come prepared with that specific number. Again, the number of reports we get is going to be underreported from the actual problem. So, but it's not uncommon to have a couple. Whether, I guess I should preface it. There are a number of reports that we get that turn out that the cause of the crime is not actually a bias type of situation. The victim of whatever crime they perceived that that's why they were the victim, but were able to prove through investigation that actually wasn't the intention of the actor. So those still get reported as bias crimes, but it would not be uncommon for us to have a couple to a few, during a week's period. So
that was kind of the number I was looking for, was the weekly average. And I saw up there non-protected group. Who's that pertain to?
So, Commissioners, I mentioned we have 7 protected classes under our hate crimes and bias incidents laws in Oregon, but for example, gender is not a protected class in Oregon under these statutes. Age is not. Housing status, marital status, anything outside of those 7 protected classes. If someone were to assault me based on my gender, most likely that would be domestic violence. It would be a partner assaulting a partner. And so there are specific laws around domestic violence, but there is not, it is a federal hate crime to target someone with a weapon based on gender, but it is not a state bias crime under our state laws. So there may be a number of other protected classes where someone may be targeted based on those classes, but those classes are not protected under our hate and bias statutes.
Got it. Okay. And then kind of back to Commissioner Farr. So we have a bias committee. I'm going to put my school board hat on for a second. At Junction City School Board, they report 3 times a year to us, beginning of the year, middle, and end of the year. And similar to the graph we saw up here, it trends up. And they actually, they ask us to look at this as we're doing our job, because people know how to report and feel comfortable reporting. Where you want to sit here and say, well, we're not doing our job. We're not doing this correctly. But when you take a step back, and then part of that is, and the school district does follow up with parents and stuff. So I think, it sure seems like everybody's trying to do the best we can in these topics. And you see those graphs go up, but look at that as you're doing your job, and you guys are doing your job. So thank you.
And Commissioners, I will note that on the standagainsthate.oregon.gov website, the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission is required to analyze hate and bias data around the state from law enforcement agencies, Department of Corrections, the courts, the hotline, DA's offices. And so there is a breakdown on our website by law enforcement agency in Oregon in their annual report. So there have been 4 annual reports that the Criminal Justice Commission has conducted, and there's a breakdown by county and by law enforcement agency on the website.
Vice Chair, did you want to?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, most of my questions got answered by the colleagues that asked great questions. Thank you. I as I'm sitting here, my heart's just kind of sunk just a little bit. And I'm sure you all are the same way. The work is emotional. It's tough. And, just the whole anti-Semitic number that spiked over the last year in Lane County really is a tough one to swallow for me in my hometown. I thought we were better than that. So I'm heartfelt in your work. I think you're doing a great work. I think it's tough work, and I think what Commissioner Farr and Commissioner Senega said about, I think people are becoming more aware to report it. That's why the trends are going up. You said yourself, Council, that we're probably just looking at the tip of the iceberg, which it never ceases to amaze me what news event or what thing brings out the worst in people. And so I'm just hoping in the future, with your good work, we can continue to scratch the surface of the good in people and move on from there. So thank you again.
Thank you. I'm just sort of looking at my notes, trying to organize my thoughts, and just offer appreciation again to all of you for the information and for being here, including online. That was a very helpful distinction about the 7 categories that are state, because I've often wondered, and I've asked our partners at City of Eugene at their Human Rights Commission when they do their report each year, why rape and sexual assault aren't included as hate and bias crimes, since they're clearly almost entirely driven by gender identity. So that's why, and maybe that's something we need to look at amending in our state law. I'm also really curious about, I can't remember where in the presentation it was brought up, I think it was Ms. Arizmendi, about sort of considering context, like what's happening in our community is often reflected by what's happening nationally and vice versa. So you mentioned like regional impact based on national issues or something, I think is what that was. So a question for the lieutenant, when investigating, where in the process is it determined something's a crime? Does that live with law enforcement or the courts? And to what, if any extent, is sort of trends and national context taken into account in making the case to motivation?
Yeah, so to answer the first question there, where it's determined to be a crime is when the fact, I guess, when it's determined by the investigator, has enough of the facts to be able to compare and see if it fits within the guidelines of the law. If it's just a bias incident, spewing hate speech out to a group may not necessarily be, that's not going to fit the letter of those statutes that we're required to operate within. So once an investigator is able to determine that it was, that the fact pattern matches one of those crimes, that's when we continue down the path of establishing the case well enough to prepare for prosecution. Regardless, in our own internal process at the sheriff's office, I can't speak for other agencies, but I can speak for the sheriff's office. Generally, regardless of if a bias incident rises to the level of a crime or not, generally, all bias incidents are going to be reported to supervisors and through command structure, because we just talked that this goes into the second part of the question, trends. If we have, trends of bias incidents, those incidents by themselves may not reach the level of a crime, but certainly what's to stop this actor from then, I guess, lack of a better term, graduating into a criminal episode of bias. So, we'll take reports on bias incidents, even if they don't meet the standard of it being a crime that can be prosecuted. We still will take reports on bias incidents so that they can be documented and ultimately utilized later if, in fact, we are able to establish a criminal pattern.
So I guess thank you. That's when you talk about the reasonable belief by the victim. So is the person taking the report then decides whether, does that report automatically get advanced to someone who then determines whether it merits further investigation, or does the responding law enforcement agent sort of get to?
So generally the investigator, the responding investigator through consult, usually with a supervisor, the responding investigator is responsible for determining if a crime has been met. However, the interpretation of facts is not as black and white as the print in the statute book, right? So oftentimes, if it's not clear if there's been a crime that's occurred or not, those reports, regardless of whether the investigator knows that it's a crime in their mind or not, those will generally be referred to our local prosecuting entity, the district attorney's office.
That's what I wanted to hear. And what kind of resources are given to the complainant in a case like that?
Generally, all crimes are. All crime victims are given resources to the District Attorney's Office Victim Services Division. We're actually looking through this process right now to start providing that same information with the DOJ to everybody, whether they are established to be a crime victim or just the victim of a bias incident. We're going to be expanding that process so that they're able to get services regardless of whether their incident reached the level of a crime or not.
Excellent. That's the answer I wanted to hear. Thank you. Two things finally, and one, I want to be really clear, this is sensitive, so I'm aware of that. I'm not making any accusations or suppositions, but authentically asking the question of you, Lieutenant, on behalf of the Sheriff's Office, what kind of ongoing training as we onboard new officers and vetting of existing workforce, just to sort of take a temperature check on where our law enforcement folks are in terms of their association or involvement with any groups that might be perpetuating. Because, of course, there's a long history. I mean, it was mentioned governments are often who's perpetuated a lot of discriminatory behavior and outright hate and bias, frankly, but particularly in law enforcement, there's a history of that. So what are we doing internally with our own department?
Yeah, absolutely. Onboarding training involves training in bias recognition, bias on multiple levels. Implicit bias training, our deputies and employees in general will undergo that training, onboarding, but then also we have a regular training cycle. I don't know if the bias training, I believe, is on a yearly schedule, but it's ongoing. So that continues. We have to recognize, and we do recognize, some of our greatest strengths are the fact that we're made up of human beings, but also that with that brings in a vulnerability. And so vetting folks in our background investigations as well to see what their affiliations were before, what kind of things they've been associated with before. That's a process too that we go with, and we conduct those thorough background investigations to hopefully try to eliminate some of that. Additionally, we don't have any tolerance for it. You know, really, it's something when we're investigating, we investigate these bias incidents out on the street. We investigate them at a very high level. We even investigate them, I would edge to say, at a much higher level within our own internal structure, because if the person investigating this crime has a bias as they do it, then it's not going to be a fair and impartial investigation. We don't have any tolerance for it. So yeah, regular training, we do that, and certainly onboarding training as well, all following after the vetting process of hiring. And when we do discover somebody that made it through that carries a bias, we don't tolerate it, and that is something that could certainly would lead towards a separation from our agency if it is shown that they hold a bias and use that bias in the course of their duties.
Thank you. And then finally, I guess for anyone on the panel, but particularly our internal folks, sort of what we can do as elected leaders of this organization, and specifically, we're hearing a lot about response, but ideally, right, just like in any public health issue, and we have declared racism a threat to public health, primary prevention is the key, so we have less things to respond to. So what, if anything, do you want to leave us with of what we could be doing to that effort?
I mean, it's a big question. I could probably spend an hour talking about that. But I think on a very basic level is, from a preventative lens, always surfacing these when they arise and taking a strong stance when they arise. I think our community looks to our leaders as a first sort of temperature check, like, where is this going? Like, is this something that is important to us? So any opportunity that you have to both elevate issues and to take a strong stance, I think will be important. And I think also, equally important, really being in collaboration with partners, and how do we come together to look at data. Even though each agency is collecting data independent of each other, it would be really interesting to see how that is all nestled with each other, right? And where there may be discrepancies, and how do we work together to ensure that our data is accurate? Because we're not sure that it is. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Looks like we are, everybody good? Great, thank you again so much. Thank you to our external partners for joining us in the audience online and at the table. Really appreciate you. Thank you.
And Chair Trieger, I will leave some materials in your mailbox just to circulate amongst each other.
Great, yeah, and I think Cameron has a routing slip to make sure we each get
Beautiful.
it. So if you want to give it to him to do that. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. All right, so our administrator gathers himself back to the table. We did announcements earlier, so unless something else has come up that you need to do, County Administrator announcements, then we will move on to item 8, which is our Public Works team coming to give us a report, which is a review of eWeb's Leeburg Dam Decommissioning Action Plan, or LDAP, and a discussion of options for Leeburg Dam Road. Welcome.
Thank you. We have a PowerPoint we'll load, and then we'll get going.
Great. And whenever you're ready, go ahead and begin and just introduce yourselves for the record. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Chair Trieger, Commissioners. My name is Sasha Vartanian, and I'm the Interim Division Manager for Engineering and Construction Services. And with me today is Becky Taylor, our amazing Senior Transportation Planner. So this agenda item is going to focus on the potential transportation impacts from the Leeburg Dam decommissioning. We are in talks with Eugene Water and Electric Board, and we, including Commissioner Buck, went and met with eWeb staff and some concerned residents about the project back in September 2023. Because the dam serves as a connection between Mackenzie Highway and which is a state facility, and Leeburg Dam Road, which is a county facility, this topic obviously interests us and has impacts on the county. Last summer was our first exposure to the project. Since then, we've been learning more. Today, we want to share what we've learned, and we believe it's an important step in what you'll see is a very long process. We would like the board's input as we communicate information for next steps to the Eugene Water and Electric Board staff as we continue to work with them. So as you can see from this timeline, it's a complex project for eWeb, and transportation impacts play an important role in determining the final outcomes. You'll see the timeline for decommissioning Lieberg Dam and implementation isn't planned till year 2040. However, we know how long it takes to plan transportation projects, so now time is imperative. Over the next several years, eWeb is going to be preparing environmental studies, including looking at transportation alternatives. Staff at eWeb have communicated to us that they're currently in the process of hiring a consultant to develop an alternatives analysis for meeting the transportation needs that the dam, which the bridge sits on top of, currently serves. So now's the time for us to be able to clearly communicate what we would like eWeb to include in that alternatives analysis. So if you aren't super familiar with this area, the transportation need is that the dam serves as the bridge. And on this slide, you'll see the location of the dam is in the red circle to the left, and it connects Mackenzie Highway, again a state facility, with Lieberg Dam Road. Lieberg Dam Road is a county road that provides access to multiple properties, and there is no through connection. Decades ago, right-of-way that would have connected Lieberg Dam Road to Lee Shore Drive was vacated. This is the area that's shown in the middle with a rectangle on the screen. eWeb staff communicated that their initial transportation option was to remove the dam structure completely and reconnect Lieberg Dam Road with Lee Shore Drive. We've already heard from several concerned neighbors about that scenario. We have also heard that eWeb may need some form of access in this location for construction purposes. They're exploring multiple alternatives. Our concern is that this would mean all traffic on Lieberg Dam Road would then be diverted onto Good Pasture Covered Bridge, which is the red circle on the right of the screen. We'll share some high-level concerns and considerations for each of these three areas identified in red on the map. First, the condition of Lieberg Dam Bridge. It is an eWeb-owned bridge that does not meet our standards. As shown in the photo, it has just one travel lane and is weight restricted. However, we did hear from a local farmer in the area that he relies on this bridge for transport of his refrigerated trucks. He transports blueberries. He indicated that he can navigate those trucks on this bridge, but not Good Pasture Covered Bridge. While we were on site in September, we observed multiple large trucks, including loaded logging trucks, pass through Lieberg Dam Bridge. eWeb has discussed removing the entire structure, including the bridge. However, they've also indicated that they are considering an option to rehabilitate the bridge over the dam. Since Lane County would likely inherit a bridge that serves a connection to a county road, we would like eWeb to explore as part of their alternatives analysis options for upgrading the bridge to standards. Lieberg Dam Road, this is a great picture and really tells the story in itself. South of the bridge is the county road. It is also not built to standards. It currently serves roughly 16 residential addresses, and it's a very narrow roadway. The public right-of-way ends to the south, as shown in the photo, and there's a gate barring further access. Again, eWeb has indicated alternative transportation access by connecting Lieberg Dam Road to Lee Shore Drive is an option they're evaluating. This would require reestablishing the right-of-way, which means private property acquisition, and includes the potential for condemnation. Of course, that's not an action we would take lightly. There would need to be a clear public need which also underscores the importance of really exploring all options here. The additional traffic would warrant upgrading the road to standards, hopefully. And as an alternative, we would like EWEB to consider a connection that is limited to construction and then after construction for emergency purposes such as evacuation, with the road having a gate except during fire season. So we've already heard as staff from several neighbors that are concerned with that alternative, and I'm sure some of you may have heard from concerned neighbors as well. And then our beloved Good Pasture Bridge. You're all familiar with this. This is a reminder of what it looks like and to note how it is just one travel lane, weight restricted, and to underscore, it's made of wood. We're interested in protecting this bridge, so we are recommending that any alternative EWEB explores takes this into consideration. In summary, the options we'd like to communicate to EWEB for them to explore in their transportation alternatives analysis are replacing Lieberg Dam Road Bridge, which would mean reconstructing the bridge to meet current standards that meet both multimodal transportation needs, including two-way traffic for people in cars, trucks, walking, or biking. Second, upgrading Lieberg Dam Bridge to meet seismic standards and ensure the bridge is in a state of good repair, especially knowing that Lane County would likely inherit the bridge. And lastly, limiting any reconnection of Lieberg Dam Road and Lee Shore Drive to emergency or evacuation purposes to minimize the impact of through traffic that would negatively affect Good Pasture Bridge and to respond to concerns from area residents. So we plan on communicating this to EWEB staff for their consideration, and we'd like to open it up to hear from you if there's other considerations the board would like us to recommend and communicate to EWEB.
Thank you for your presentation. Anything from you today, Ms. Taylor, or not?
No comments from me. Thank you for asking, Chair.
Open it up to the board then. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you. Since this is within my district, and I have been talking with a lot of residents about that, I thought it would make sense for me to start. So clearly, this entire project has been very controversial for the whole area. First, their lake turning into a river instead of a recreational lake has been already very upsetting. That decision has been made. And so at this point, we have to be very diligent about how we are going to work with them, and potentially ODOT, given the access to the main highway, because the times that I've spoken with staff from EWEB, it was made clear, although there might be an open door, that they were not interested in putting in a new bridge at that point. Once they were done and decommissioned, they wanted to be done with the project. And as you can all see from the map, if you look back at the one that shows the connections to the roads, the rectangle connector point here is private property. And there are log trucks, in addition to refrigerated trucks. These are trafficked areas. And right now, they have to go over the bridge, the Lieberg Bridge itself. The capacity from our covered bridge is non-existent at this point. It just couldn't handle that load and that traffic. And I'm not a fan of condemnation for something that these people never asked for in the first place. So I fully support having them rebuild a bridge across to full standards, to a point where it would be acceptable for the county to take over maintenance of that road. I just think its probability is very low that that's something that they would agree to. But that is something that we have to do and pressure now, given the timeline. And the other thing that I hear a lot in response to this project is it's really far down the road. We shouldn't be worried about it right now. And that's highly problematic given the cost associated and the timeline associated with transportation projects, as you spoke to originally. So it is very timely that we deliver a really important message about what is needed for these people right now. I don't see how we would be able to alter our covered bridge for any kind of results regarding this project. Of course, we hold our covered bridges in high regard, and we want to keep them, and we want to maintain them for the public. They're a large tourist destination for a lot of people here too. And some are no longer able to even be funded, and some are no longer main roads. But construction or reconstruction of something like that, of our own bridge across that waterway, would be really intense. And I'd rather avoid that at all costs. The other thing is really important to me, given that we have fires out there nearly every year now, is double access. So there is Fish Hatchery Road that kind of goes down to the south, right across the bridge. It's a white line from the red circle on the left, just going down. And that is a potential second access point for people to get in. It's just not as convenient. And property owners there, you would have to go through private property there too. But there is an owner that might actually be interested in participating in that effort because it affects their business. So in addition to your list of items, your 3 list of items, in number 3, it says limiting any connection of Leesburg Dam Road and Lee Shore Drive to emergency evacuation purposes. There needs to be something else in there that states somehow we're going to work on a second access point for the west side near the bridge. Otherwise, I'm afraid, like, even during construction, there could be a fire, right? These construction projects take a long time and they don't have a way out. And, I don't know that EWEB has any jurisdiction to go down the condemnation route for the private property that would actually connect those two. That would be something I think that they would come to us. I don't know how that actually works. And I wouldn't be inclined to do that. So we need a second access route to ensure that during construction, there is a way for residents to escape any fire-related incident or any other natural disaster incident on that route. But really, what I want to see in the right context is a brand-new bridge at their cost, fully upgraded, and how to encourage that might be challenging for us, but I would really like help from the rest of the board to really stress that in our work with them, because we will be working together on this project for a very long time. Thank you, Chair, for letting me extend that.
Commissioner Farr?
Thank you, Jordan. I'm happy to fold in behind Commissioner Buck on this because this is your district. You spent a lot of time up there in the last few years, a lot of time. And I've spent a lot of time up there in the last 50 years with my family, and the recreational element of the lake is something that's not discardable in people's minds. However, as Commissioner Buck said, this is already in process, and there's no reversing that decision that I can see. So it becomes that, the transportation is the main issue that we should be thinking about at this point in time. And though it may be 40 years down the road, that time will pass. And if we don't do something, this is not a time to kick the can down the road. It's a time to get things in process. And there are just two things I'd point out. The Good Pasture Covered Bridge is a gem. There's no question about it. And I would prefer to see no traffic other than maybe pedestrian and bicycle traffic on it. I don't know what the possibility of that is, but you see the Lowell Covered Bridge. Now that road is more traveled than the Good Pasture Island Bridge, but very successfully, upstream alternate bridge has been constructed there. And I don't know what the expense of that is and if it can be warranted by the limited number of people who actually live on the other side. But, an alternate bridge right at the Good Pasture Island. Because our covered bridges are marvelous. They really are. And people come from all over the world. My sister tells me that people come from all over the world to see our bridges. And we need to keep them intact. So my preference always is going to be, let's take cars off them completely if we possibly can. That's one choice. And the only other thing I would mention, Commissioner Buck, is the end of Leeburg Dam Road to the start of Lee Shore Drive. In between, I think that's a big blueberry agricultural area right there. But between the blueberries and the river, there's a house, and there's Honey Creek and Granite Creek, a couple of little creeks there. But it's not very far, and most of that is in, I'm not going to say scrub, but it's in wild growth of trees and shrubs. Without disrupting much agriculture and certainly with an effect on a single house, that seems like a fairly short link to reattain the through route right there. Maybe the least expensive way to do it and the least disruptive way to do it. I'm going to leave it in your hands. I go to Waterboard Park all the time, taught my two older sons to swim in that lake, as cold as that lake is. And everybody uses the area. We have the old fish hatchery across the river that is going to be, at some point in the not too distant future, a real magnet for travel for visitors. So all of this has to go into the wash, but I'll join Commissioner Buck. Commissioner Buck, you're asking for us to join you in the efforts and your concerns about it. Commissioner Buck spent a lot of time up there. I've spent a lot of time up there. I think we all have in our own way, but I leave it in your able hands to look at all the alternatives. My 2 cents worth, 10 cents worth, is an alternate bridge to replace automobile traffic over the Good Pasture Island Bridge and linking those two roads in what is a relatively short, and I'm not going to say unused, and I'm not even going to say relatively unused, but it looks like it mainly is wild growth of shrubs and trees. Thanks.
Vice Chair?
Thank you. Yeah, so I want to make sure I understand both of you guys' camps, just so I go forward. I'm understanding, and I'm on board with Commissioner Buck on all the research and the things that you've done. I think you've got a great heading on that. I'm just wondering, when you said about that south road, are you talking about, during the construction, a temporary sort of bridge so people have access, or one that would eventually become a secondary access?
The possibility of a secondary access. That's been discussed with some of the neighbors, because, again, not only was the rectangle in the center private property, so is the property to the south of the hatchery. So either route involves property owners, if they're even willing. I've spoken to the neighbors to the south of the hatchery on the bottom left on an potential access there, and there seems to be some potential. And I'd like to explore that further.
And then, Commissioner Farr, you said that you would rather see the Good Pasture Island Bridge just be bicycles and pedestrians, so that would necessitate a new bridge there too. So it sounds like in both cases, we're looking at 2 new bridges. Is that what I'm understanding at this point?
In my mind,
in theory,
pardon my interruption, or my jumping in first. In my mind, it would necessitate 2 permanent bridges, and I don't know the expense of an alternate bridge, auto bridge to a Good Pasture Island. I don't know if that is too expensive to consider based upon this relatively small amount of traffic that is there currently.
I can add.
Go ahead, yeah. I have a few more questions, but go ahead.
Yeah, the only consideration we would need to make if we were to put something in additional to the covered bridge is that it's a very dangerous intersection, and with high speeds. And so the more ideal access road is where the existing Leeburg-Hatchery Bridge is located.
And if I
Staff
may,
wanted to
Chair
add.
Trieger, I will also add just context. It's a lot easier to build a bridge where a bridge already existed versus all of the environmental documentation and work it would take to put new foundations in a body of water.
That's a really good point, yeah.
Administrator.
I just wanted to offer maybe some context. Commissioner Buck brought this up, and I think what we're looking for is feedback really from the board on the position that the county should be taking in regards to this issue. You mentioned, Commissioner Buck, that EWEB has a responsibility to, if the county is going to take over this transportation access, EWEB has a responsibility to develop it and build it to a standard and then turn it over. And it dawned on me that probably the most significant and recent example that has some parallels to this is when Lane County took over Territorial Highway from the state of Oregon. And we handed over a spur of Delta Highway to ODOT. There's a recognition that Territorial Highway really should be a county road, and the county has desires and the community has desires to develop that in a way that allows for biking, biker safety, and improvements that need to be made to the road. And also that Delta Highway is really a state highway, right? So we did this exchange, but also recognition that there's a cost that is going to come with the significant mileage of Territorial Highway. And what's the number? How much did we receive from the state of Oregon?
A total at the end of the day will be $30 million.
$30 million. So we did this exchange. We gave a small portion of Delta Highway that Lane County was responsible for maintaining to the state. We took over how many miles of Territorial?
But it was Beltline Road, not Delta Highway, right?
No,
Wasn't it
Delta.
567? Okay, all right.
It was Delta, yeah. Okay. And $30 million. So I just wanted to give an example of where, in that case, it was an exchange, but there was also, this was also a situation where the state provided the funding to bring Territorial, said, here, county, it's appropriate that you take over this road, but we're going to give you $30 million to bring it up, to do the maintenance and the improvements that are needed to bring it up to a certain level of standard. So I just wanted to offer that example to your point of, this is an EWEB bridge that exists. They have plans to decommission the dam that will have impacts to that transportation and a desire to turn something over to the county, but they really need to, as you stated, bring this, create a solution, bring it to a standard, and then come to agreement with the county to take it over for maintenance in the long term.
Did you have more, Vice Chair?
I got to process it, but yeah, later, thank you.
Well, I'll just add my voice to the chorus of redundancy of access is critical for fire, for other emergencies and disasters, for all manner of reasons. It's just good practice. I also would like to maintain the emphasis on multimodal development so that we're building the infrastructure for the future and all the different ways people get around, and to help support the vibrancy and the economic, the tourism and economic activity associated with it up there. In the packet, it asked about maybe having an eWeb presentation in the future. I think that's important. I would look for some feedback on when the right time is. We don't want to do it too soon, but we don't want to let them get, as I'm hearing, generally too far down the road, because then they'll start making decisions that set them up to be in conflict with our priorities or what will actually work. So finding that sweet spot of when is too soon because they're not ready to receive or they're not at that place of the project, but not get so far down the road that they feel like we're trying to undo work. But when I look at the graph, the decommissioning action plan, like we're right in that time.
Chair Trieger, if I may recommend, the idea from eWeb staff is to perform a triple bottom line analysis of the transportation options to be evaluated. And so perhaps upon completion of that analysis, they bring the findings to the board.
That sounds great. Do you have any, do you know, are we thinking this fall? Are we thinking?
I believe it's roughly a year-long, 6-month to year-long process, but I'll confirm and we'll follow up with the board.
That they're just starting now?
Yes, we have a work session, a staff work session with them in 2 weeks.
So it might be in this calendar year or early very next. Okay, great, thank you. That's all from me. Anything else? Anything else staff needs at this time on this item?
Not at all. Thank you very much for the feedback.
Thank you. All right. Looking down the agenda, as we said earlier, no need for a morning executive session. Do we have, before recessing for lunch, any other business? Seeing none, I will call us into recess. We are back here at 1:30 for a time certain, and so until then, we are recessed.